A Dyson fan accidentally revealed my wife's affair. I took revenge in the funniest way imaginable. I discovered my wife's cheating because of a fan. Yes, you read it right. Never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. You know how it goes. You meet someone, fall in love, and think you found the one. That was me about 7 years ago. I was working as an IT guy in this mid-sized firm, nothing too fancy, just your average cubicle job. I liked it because it was low-key, and I could zone out with podcasts all day. But then one day the company hired a new project manager, and that's when everything changed. Her name was Callie. She was this vibrant, energetic woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. I noticed her the moment she stepped into our office, all confidence and charisma, like she owned the place. She had this way of talking that made you feel like you were the only person in the world she cared about. And for a while, it felt like maybe I was that person. We started chatting during lunch breaks. At first, it was just casual stuff. Where are you from? What do you do for fun? That kind of thing. But it quickly escalated to deeper conversations about our dreams, fears, and everything in between. Before long, I was looking forward to those chats more than anything else in my day. It felt like we clicked in a way I hadn't experienced before. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were dating. It wasn't long before we moved in together. Callie and I didn't hesitate to take big steps, even if we weren't together for long, because we were that couple who did everything together. We cooked elaborate dinners, binge-watched Netflix series, and even took those cheesy couples yoga classes. I was all in, head over heels, thinking this was it, the relationship that would last forever. We eventually got married in a small ceremony with just close friends and family, nothing too flashy, just the way we liked it. But you know how they say the honeymoon phase doesn't last forever? Yeah, they're not kidding. After a couple of years, the cracks started to show. I've seen things go down even more quickly in other relationships. At least ours took a little while longer. It was little things at first. Callie's sudden interest in working late, the way she seemed more focused on her phone than on our conversations. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that every couple goes through rough patches. But deep down, I could feel that something was off. The first big fight we had was about something stupid. I don't even remember what it was, but it was intense, and it left me feeling like we were suddenly speaking different languages. That's when I realized how much we'd changed since those early days. The things that used to bring us together now seemed to push us apart. I wanted to talk about it, to work through whatever was going on between us, but every time I tried, Callie would shut down. She'd either get defensive or accuse me of overthinking everything. It wasn't just the fights, though. There were other signs that things were going south. Callie started making plans without me, going out with her friends more often, and spending weekends away for work trips. The worst part was that I could feel myself growing more distant, too. I started finding excuses not to be home, throwing myself into work or hanging out with my own friends just to avoid the tension. We were like two strangers living under the same roof, pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where things went wrong. I mean, I was still in love with her, at least I thought I was. But it was like I didn't know how to reach her anymore. Every time I tried, she'd just slip further away. I started questioning everything. Was it me? Was it her? Had we just outgrown each other? I didn't want to believe that was possible, but the evidence was hard to ignore. We tried going to couples therapy, but it felt more like a chore than something that could actually help. Callie would show up late, clearly disinterested, and I'd end up doing most of the talking while she sat there with her arms crossed, barely listening. After a few sessions, we both decided it wasn't working, and that was that. The idea of splitting up started creeping into my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. It felt like admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready for that. I started feeling like the woman in our relationship, because it's usually them who try their hardest to fix a completely broken relationship and wonder if the problem is actually in them. I didn't really like being too emotionally involved. I loved Callie in a way I had never loved anyone else, and until then, I was willing to fight for us, but it felt horrible being the only one willing to. So I did what any self-respecting adult would do. I ignored the problem and hoped it would go away on its own. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Instead, things got even worse. Callie became more secretive, and I started noticing small but telling changes. She'd get jumpy when I walked into the room, close her laptop quickly, and always seemed to have an excuse ready whenever I asked her about her day. It was like we were living in two different worlds, and I was the only one who hadn't been given the script. I'd love to say that I confronted her like a mature adult, but that's not what happened. Instead, I buried my head in the sand, hoping it was all in my imagination. It wasn't until we bought that damn Dyson fan, which came into the picture and revealed what I didn't know. But before I get into that, you need to understand just how low things had gotten between us. At that point, I was more focused on surviving each day without another argument than on fixing what was clearly broken. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, never sure what would set her off or when the next fight would happen. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel myself growing more resentful with each passing day. I wasn't happy, not by a long shot, but I couldn't bring myself to leave either. There was this part of me that still clung to the idea of us, of the life we'd built together. But looking back, I think I was just scared of starting over, of admitting that I'd failed at the one thing I thought I'd gotten right. So I stayed, even though I knew deep down that the relationship was on life support. And that's when fate, or rather a Dyson fan, decided to step in and give me the wake-up call I'd been avoiding. There I was, stuck in a marriage that was rapidly unraveling, too stubborn or scared to do anything about it. Honestly, the last thing I expected was for a household appliance to be the catalyst for everything blowing up in my face. It all started when Callie decided that our bedroom needed a makeover. She'd been complaining about the heat, saying our old fan just wasn't cutting it anymore. I figured it was another one of those passing complaints, but she went all out, researching the best cooling systems like it was a life or death situation. A few days later, she showed up with a brand new Dyson fan, one of those sleek, bladeless ones that look like they belong in a sci-fi movie. She was so proud of it, like she'd just brought home the holy grail of air circulation. We even discussed getting an AC, but our city isn't actually that hot for such an expense. The Dyson fan seemed like a good option, not like I had an opinion on it, but she seemed happy with her new toy. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, it was just a fan, right? We set it up in the corner of the room, and I had to admit, it was pretty impressive. It was quiet, powerful, and looked cool, literally and figuratively. But it wasn't long before I started noticing something strange. Every time I walked into the room, the fan was pointing in a different direction. Now, I'm not usually the paranoid type, but it was weird. I'd leave it facing the bed, and when I came back, it'd be pointing at the window, or the door, or the closet. At first I thought it was just Callie adjusting it. Maybe she liked the air circulating differently or something, but it kept happening even when she wasn't around. One night, after a particularly tense dinner where we barely spoke to each other, I decided to test a theory. I positioned the fan to face the bed, made a mental note of exactly where it was pointing, and then went downstairs to grab a beer. When I came back up, the fan had shifted ever so slightly, just enough to make me think I was losing my mind. But then I remembered something. These fancy fans had motion sensors designed to detect movement and adjust airflow accordingly. That's when it hit me. What if it wasn't just detecting us? What if it was picking up on something else? It sounds crazy, I know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So, I did what any sane person would do in my situation. I turned to Google. After a bit of digging, I found out that the Dyson fan's motion sensor was pretty sensitive. It could detect even the smallest changes in the room, like a door opening or someone walking by. That's when the paranoia really set in. What if the fan was catching movement when I wasn't around? What if Callie wasn't as alone in the house as she claimed to be during the day? I started paying more attention to the little details, the times Callie would be home alone, the strange shifts in the fan's direction, the odd timing of her texts and calls. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that something was definitely going on. I knew I had to find out for sure, but I didn't want to confront her without proof. I wasn't about to accuse my wife of cheating based on a fan's quirky behavior. So I decided to set a trap. I installed a small, hidden camera in our bedroom, aimed directly at the fan. If there was anything or anyone causing it to move, I'd catch it on tape. For the next few days, I watched that footage like a hawk. At first, there was nothing, just the usual comings and goings, Callie moving around the room, the fan occasionally adjusting its direction. But then, one afternoon, I saw it. Callie was in the room, talking on the phone, pacing back and forth like she always did when she was deep in conversation. But this time, she wasn't alone. A few minutes into the call, the door opened and a man walked in. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. The way he walked up to her, the way they hugged, it was all the confirmation I needed. My heart sank. There it was, plain as day, my worst fears realized. Callie was having an affair, and she wasn't even trying that hard to hide it. The fan had been catching their movements, reacting to their presence whenever they were in the room together. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner, for letting things get this bad without doing anything about it. But after the initial shock wore off, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry, angrier than I'd ever been in my life. I wasn't going to sit around and let her get away with this. If she wanted to play games, then fine. I'd play too, but on my terms. That's when the idea came to me. It started as a small, petty thought, but the more I considered it, the more perfect it seemed. I wasn't going to confront her, at least not directly. No, I was going to make her life as uncomfortable as possible, and I was going to use that damn Dyson fan to do it. I knew she had a big presentation coming up at work, something she'd been stressing about for weeks. She'd been rehearsing in our bedroom, using the fan to keep the air cool while she practiced her speech in front of the mirror. I waited until the night before the presentation, when she was asleep, to put my plan into action. First, I reprogrammed the fan. I figured out how to access the settings and change the motion detection sensitivity to the maximum level. Now, even the slightest movement would cause it to go haywire, swinging back and forth unpredictably. Then I rigged it to emit a low, barely audible hum whenever it detected motion, just loud enough to be annoying, but not so loud that she'd realize it was deliberate. The next morning, I made sure to act normal, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek before heading out to work. I knew she'd spend the morning rehearsing one last time before heading to the office. Sure enough, around midday, I got a frantic text from her. "The fan's broken or something," she wrote. "It won't stop moving and making this weird noise." I played dumb, texting back, "That's weird. Maybe it's just the heat?" I could picture her in the bedroom, trying to stay calm while the fan went berserk, throwing her off her game every few seconds. The thought of it made me grin like an idiot. It was a small victory, but it felt good to have the upper hand for once. Of course, that was just the beginning. The fan was just a warm-up, a test run for the real revenge that was yet to come. It was just the start, a way to mess with Callie's head and see how far I could push her before she snapped. I wasn't satisfied with a few glitches and distractions. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation and confusion I'd been dealing with for months. I wanted her to know that I wasn't just some clueless, bumbling husband who could be kept in the dark while she had her fun on the side. So, after the fan stunt, I stepped up my game. I started small. Subtle changes that were just annoying enough to get under her skin. I'd switch her contact lenses with older, slightly weaker prescriptions, so she'd squint at her computer screen all day. I'd rearrange the files on her laptop just enough to throw off her meticulously organized system. Nothing too drastic, just enough to keep her on edge. She started to unravel. I could see it in the way she was constantly on her phone, trying to figure out what was wrong. Her texts became frantic, her emails short and snappy. She was losing control, and it was only a matter of time before she cracked. Then, one evening, after yet another one of her late-night work meetings, I decided it was time to push her over the edge. I waited until she was in the shower and snuck into the bedroom, opening her laptop. I found her presentation file and inserted a few, shall we say, interesting slides. It was nothing too outrageous, just a few subtle digs, things that would only make sense if you knew what was going on. A slide titled "Infidelity and Professionalism," a case study, for example, followed by a few graphs that made absolutely no sense. I left the rest of the presentation intact, knowing she wouldn't have time to go through it all before her big meeting the next day. The following morning, I made sure to stay home sick so I could watch the chaos unfold. Sure enough, around noon, my phone started blowing up with messages from her. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed into the phone when I finally picked up. I could barely contain my laughter as she ranted about how I'd sabotaged her career, how I'd ruined her life, how I was a vindictive, petty little man. "Are you seriously accusing me of messing with your presentation?" I said, feigning innocence. "Maybe if you weren't so distracted all the time, you'd have noticed before you got to the office." That was the spark that lit the fuse. She came storming home that evening, practically kicking the door open, her face red with rage. I'd never seen her so furious. She was practically vibrating with anger. "You think this is funny?" she screamed, throwing her bag onto the floor. "You've been screwing with me for weeks. I know it was you with the fan and the files, and now this. What the hell is wrong with you?" I stood there, arms crossed, not even trying to hide my smirk. "What's wrong with me? You mean besides the fact that my wife has been cheating on me with some random guy while I'm busting my ass trying to keep this marriage together?" She froze, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, the anger disappeared, replaced by pure panic. What are you talking about? I'm not..." "Don't even try to lie to me, Callie," I interrupted, my voice cold and steady. "I know everything. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the guy you've been sneaking into our house when you think I'm not paying attention. I've got it all on tape, thanks to that fan you love so much." She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't done. "I gave you every chance to come clean, to tell me the truth, but you didn't. So now, I'm done playing nice." Her face went pale, and for a moment I thought she might faint. But then the anger came rushing back, even stronger than before. "You set me up. You're the one who's been sabotaging me, making me look like a fool at work, and now you're trying to blame me for your insecurities?" "Insecurities?" I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Is that what you call it when your wife is screwing someone else behind your back? I call that betrayal. But you know what? You're right, I did set you up. I wanted you to feel a fraction of the humiliation and confusion I've been feeling since I found out. And guess what? It worked." She lunged at me then, fists swinging, but I easily sidestepped her. She stumbled, nearly tripping over her own feet, and for a moment I thought she might fall. But she caught herself, whirling around to face me, her eyes wild with fury. "You think this is some kind of game?" she spat. "You think you can humiliate me like this and just walk away? I'll ruin you." "Ruin me?" I interrupted again, my voice dangerously calm. "Oh, Callie, you've already done that. You've destroyed everything we had, and for what? A fling? A few cheap thrills? You're not ruining me. You're ruining yourself." She was shaking now, her whole body trembling with rage. "I'll take everything," she hissed. "The house, the car, everything. You'll be left with nothing." I shook my head, almost pitying her. "You can have it all, Callie. I don't care about the stuff. But you know what you won't have? Your dignity. Everyone at work knows about your little case study now. They'll see you for the fraud you are, and I'll be there to watch as your perfect little life crumbles around you." She stood there, breathing heavily, her face twisted in anger and desperation. I could see the realization dawning on her that she'd lost, that there was no way out of this, and in that moment I felt something shift inside me, something dark and vengeful. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done. "You should leave," I said quietly, turning away from her. "Pack your things and get out. We're done here." For a moment, she just stood there as if she couldn't believe what was happening. But then, without another word, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. As I listened to the sound of her car engine fading into the distance, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a twisted sense of satisfaction. I'd won, the fight was over, but the real battle was just beginning. Update. It's been a few weeks since our explosive fight. Callie was gone from the house within a few hours. I didn't hear from her for a couple of days, which gave me some much-needed space to think. I'd spent so much time focused on getting back at her that I hadn't fully processed what it would mean when she was actually out of my life. As angry as I was, there was still a part of me that remembered the woman I fell in love with, and that made the silence in the house feel even more deafening. But I didn't have much time to dwell on it, because things escalated quickly after she left. The first sign of trouble came when I got served with divorce papers. No surprise there, Callie wasn't the type to drag things out. But what did surprise me was the long list of demands she had. She wanted the house, the car, and a ridiculous amount of alimony. It was as if she thought she could just waltz out of our marriage and take everything with her, leaving me with nothing. I'll admit, I felt a flash of panic when I saw that list. It was one thing to have a blowout fight and watch her walk out the door, but it was another thing entirely to think about losing everything I'd worked for. But then, just as quickly, that panic was replaced by determination. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me, not after everything she'd done. My first move was to get a lawyer, a good one. I wasn't about to roll over and play nice just because things had gotten ugly. My lawyer, a woman named Karen, listened to the whole story with a stony expression before giving me a firm nod. "We'll fight this," she said, her voice full of confidence. "She's not going to get away with this." With Karen on my side, I felt a little more at ease, but it wasn't just about the legal battle. I wanted to make sure the truth came out. Callie had always been so good at playing the victim, at making herself look like the perfect wife in front of everyone else. But now, I had a chance to show people who she really was. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to expose her for the liar she was. I started reaching out to a few trusted friends to explain what was happening. I knew the rumor mill would start spinning as soon as word got out that we were getting divorced, and I wanted to get ahead of it. I told them the truth, about the affair, about how I'd found out, and about how I wasn't going to let her take me down without a fight. To my relief, most of them were supportive. A few were shocked, some were disappointed, but overall, they had my back. It felt good to have people in my corner. Of course, it didn't take long for Callie to start her own damage control. She posted a long, dramatic message on social media about how she was devastated by the end of our marriage, how she'd tried everything to make it work, but that I had become distant and cruel. She even hinted that I'd been the one who pushed her away, that she had no choice but to leave. I couldn't believe the nerve of her, trying to spin the story like she was the victim. But I kept my cool and didn't respond. Instead, I let Karen do the talking in court. The first hearing was brutal, but it was clear that we had the upper hand. Karen had a comeback for everything that Callie's lawyer said. Our case was clearly winning. After that, Callie's demands suddenly seemed ridiculous, even to her. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, something that would allow her to save face and avoid a public spectacle. But by then, I was beyond caring about her reputation. I wanted justice, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less. The judge eventually ruled in my favor on almost every count. Callie got none of the alimony she demanded, and while she did get some assets, they were a fraction of what she had originally wished for. Most importantly, the truth about her affair was out in the open, and she couldn't escape it. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected. It was a relief, but also strangely anticlimactic. After all the drama and the build-up, it was over with a few signatures on a piece of paper. Callie left town not long after that, probably hoping to start fresh somewhere where people didn't know about her past. I didn't care. I was free, and that was all that mattered. Now, a few months later, I'm doing surprisingly well. I've kept the house, and while it's still weird to walk through it without thinking of her, it's getting easier. I've started dating again. Nothing serious yet, just trying to see what's out there. And as for Callie, last I heard, she's struggling to find work, her reputation in tatters after everything that came out during the divorce. In the end, I got what I wanted. I took back control of my life, and I didn't let her walk away without facing the consequences of her actions. It wasn't easy, and there were definitely times when I wondered if I'd gone too far. But looking back, I have no regrets. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. And in this case, I burned down everything that was holding me back. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that you can't let people walk all over you. You have to stand up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. Because in the end, you're the only one who can fight for your own happiness, and that's exactly what I did.